September 19th, 1944, 0712 hours, Arracourt, Lorraine, France. Captain James Jimmie Leach stood in the turret of his Sherman tank, watching smoke rise from the eastern ridgeline 3 kilometers away, and realized with cold certainty that his entire battalion was about to die. 22 years old, 3 months in combat, Company B Commander, 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, Patton's spearhead, 3rd Army's tip of the spear, the unit that had raced 600 miles across France in 60 days and never stopped. But now they were isolated, cut off, surrounded by 2 German panzer brigades with orders to destroy them. And Jimmie Leach had 15 Sherman tanks to hold the line. Behind him, Combat Command A headquarters sat exposed in the village of Arracourt. Supply trucks, artillery pieces, wounded men, ammunition dumps. Ahead of him, coming over that ridge, were the panzers. He didn't know it yet, but in the next 72 hours, his company would face impossible odds, execute counterattacks that defied tactical doctrine, and help destroy the largest German armored counteroffensive on the Western Front before the Battle of the Bulge. The radio crackled. Colonel Bruce Clark's voice, urgent, sharp, completely unlike his usual calm. "Leach, where the hell is your company?" Jimmie Leach looked east. The smoke was getting closer. 72 hours earlier, the 37th Tank Battalion had been winning the war. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, West Point graduate, tactical genius, the man who would later command all U.S. forces in Vietnam and have America's main battle tank named after him, had led the 37th in a lightning thrust across the Moselle River on September 13th. They'd punched through German lines at Nancy, overrun the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division's rear command post at Arracourt, seized bridges across the Rhine-Marne Canal at Valhalla after clearing 8 88mm anti-tank guns and 300 German soldiers in brutal house-to-house fighting. By September 15th, they'd advanced so far beyond their supply lines that Patton himself had ordered them to halt. But the Germans hadn't halted. While the 37th consolidated positions around Arracourt, 5th Panzer Army Commander General Hasso von Montefiore assembled a counteroffensive force designed to do one thing: destroy the American bridgehead at Nancy and drive Patton's 3rd Army back across the Moselle. The strike force? 111th Panzer Brigade, 113th Panzer Brigade, elements of the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, over 260 armored fighting vehicles, Panthers, Mark IVs, Tigers, self-propelled guns. Against them, Combat Command A, 4th Armored Division, approximately 70 Sherman tanks, a handful of M5 light tanks, and 7 M18 Hellcat tank destroyers. The Germans had superior numbers, superior firepower, superior armor protection. On paper, it wasn't a battle. It was a massacre waiting to happen. But on September 15th, the Germans recaptured the Nancy bridgehead, cutting off the 37th Tank Battalion and the rest of CCA east of the Moselle. The trap had closed. Now the killing could begin. September 19th, 0700 hours. Captain William Dwight, the 37th's liaison officer to CCA headquarters, was driving back from a forward position when he saw them. Panzers, dozens of them, moving through morning fog toward Arracourt. The 111th Panzer Brigade, fresh from training grounds in Germany, equipped with brand-new Panthers, commanded by officers who'd been told the Americans were exhausted, undersupplied, and demoralized. He didn't have time to reach CCA headquarters. He didn't have time to call for the 37th's main force. He had 4 M18 Hellcat tank destroyers. That was it. At 0720 hours, Dwight positioned his tiny force across the road leading to CCA headquarters and opened fire. The German column never expected resistance. The lead Panthers, moving in road formation, unbuttoned, commanders standing in open hatches, took direct hits at 800 meters. Turrets exploded, crews bailed out into the fog. But Dwight had 4 guns. The Germans had 50 vehicles in column. Within minutes, return fire began walking toward the American positions. 75mm rounds from Panthers, 88mm from Tigers farther back, high explosive shells that turned trees into splinters and men into mist. Dwight's first Hellcat exploded, then the second, then the third. At 0742 hours, with one gun left and German infantry moving to flank his position, Dwight called for help. Behind him, 9 German Panzers burned on the road, proof that the Americans would not surrender easily. But the main German assault had just begun. Colonel Bruce Clark stood outside CCA headquarters, watching artillery crews prepare to fire direct fire at approaching tanks, and realized he was about to lose everything. His headquarters, his supply trains, his artillery, his wounded. The Germans were 2 kilometers away and closing fast. He grabbed the radio, called for Captain Jimmie Leach, Company B, 37th Tank Battalion, currently stationed in the village of Chambray, 5 kilometers northwest. Leech, report to Arracourt immediately. Emergency. Leech received the order at 0745 hours. He thought it was routine, maybe a planning conference, maybe new orders for a patrol. He left his company behind and drove alone to Arracourt in his Jeep. Bad decision. When he arrived at 0810 hours, Clark met him with fury in his eyes and fear in his voice. "Where the hell is your company?" Leech turned, looked east. The ridgeline 3 kilometers away was covered in German armor. 20, maybe 25 Panthers and Mark IVs moving toward them in a textbook assault formation. American artillery, 105mm howitzers, firing direct fire because there was no time for indirect, was desperately trying to slow them down. But artillery couldn't hold tanks. Only tanks could hold tanks. Leech sprinted to his Jeep, radioed Company B, ordered them forward at maximum speed. Then he waited, watched the Germans advance, watched artillery shells explode uselessly against Panther frontal armor, and thought, "We're going to die here." 0847 hours. Company B arrived. 15 Sherman tanks, 76mm guns, better than the old 75, but still inferior to German armor and firepower. Crews that had been in combat for 3 months straight, exhausted, low on ammunition, outnumbered nearly 2-to-1. Jimmie Leach didn't wait for the Germans to reach CCA headquarters. He attacked. All units, line formation, advance to contact, fire on the move. The Shermans surged forward, not defensively, not cautiously, but aggressively, engines roaring, tracks chewing mud, 76mm guns traversing toward targets. The Germans hesitated. They'd been told the Americans were retreating, told resistance would be minimal. No one had told them 15 Shermans would charge directly at their assault force. At 900 meters, Leach's tanks opened fire. The 76mm M1 gun, muzzle velocity 2,600 feet per second, could penetrate 125 millimeters of armor at 100 meters, could kill a Panther through the side or rear, could mission kill a Mark IV through the front. But only if American crews could shoot faster, maneuver better, and outthink German tankers who'd been taught that Shermans were inferior. Leach's lead tank, a Sherman named Cobra, fired on the move and struck a Panther in the turret ring. The German tank slewed sideways, turret jammed, crew abandoning. Second shot, another Panther, hit in the track, immobilized. Third shot, a Mark IV, penetration through frontal armor, catastrophic kill, ammunition exploding, turret lifting 3 feet into the air before crashing down. The German column broke. Not retreated, broke. Panthers reversed frantically. Mark IVs turned to present frontal armor. Infantry scattered into woods.
Company B lost 3 tanks in the engagement, hit by return fire, crews bailing out under cover of smoke. But they'd stopped the German assault cold. Leech regrouped his company, pulled back to defensive positions overlooking the ridgeline, and waited. Clark's voice came over the radio, calm now, almost amused. "Good work, Leech. Hold that position." Jimmie Leach looked at his 12 remaining tanks and wondered how long he could hold anything. Then the Germans attacked again. 1300 hours. Company A arrived from Lunéville. Captain William Spencer, Distinguished Service Cross recipient, one of the most experienced tank commanders in the 37th, a man who'd led his company through the breakout at Normandy and the race across France, reported to Major William Hunter, the battalion executive officer. Hunter had been given command of a task force, Company A, Company B, elements of the 10th Armored Infantry Battalion, supporting artillery. His orders: counterattack. Find the German assembly areas, destroy them before they can regroup. At 13:15 hours, Hunter launched his attack. Company B, under Leech, advanced along the southern route, fixing German attention, drawing fire, forcing Panthers to commit to engagement. Company A, under Spencer, swept north, looking for flanks, looking for vulnerabilities, looking for the kill shot. At 13:42 hours, Spencer found it. A German assembly area. 15 to 20 Mark V Panthers, stationary, refueling, crews outside their vehicles, smoking, eating, thinking they were safe behind the ridgeline. Spencer didn't call for permission, didn't wait for infantry support, didn't hesitate. He attacked. All units, combat formation, full speed, fire at will. His Shermans crested the ridge at 35 miles per hour, main guns already traversed toward their targets, loaders slamming 76mm rounds into breaches, gunners acquiring Panthers that were desperately trying to button up and start engines. The first Sherman fired at 400 meters, side shot on a Panther, penetration, catastrophic kill. Second Sherman, another Panther, rear hit, engine compartment fire. Third, fourth, fifth. The German assembly area turned into chaos. Some Panthers managed to start engines, some crews got their turrets traversed, a few fired back, and 3 of Spencer's Shermans exploded, including his own command tank. Spencer bailed out, hit the ground running, gathered his crew and 8 other survivors from knocked-out tanks. And then, on foot, under fire, he led them back toward American lines, navigating by compass, moving through German-occupied territory, dodging patrols. He arrived at battalion headquarters at 2200 hours, all 9 men, alive. Meanwhile, Company B swept through the assembly area again, this time from the opposite direction, firing through the chaos, turning the battlefield into a graveyard of burning Panthers. When the smoke cleared, the Germans had lost the assembly area, lost their refueling point, lost their cohesion, and Jimmie Leach's Company B had executed one more impossible mission. Later that night, survivors gathered at Lazy Village and counted the cost. 49 German tanks destroyed, smoldering wrecks scattered across the Lorraine countryside. American losses: 8 Shermans knocked out, 14 men wounded, 0 dead. If you made it this far, you're the reason channels like ours can keep the past alive. Let me know where you're tuning in from. Drop a like and subscribe so these voices from history continue to be heard. The Germans refused to accept defeat. On September 20th, they attacked again, this time with elements of the 111th Panzer Brigade Reserve, trying to cut off CCA's supply lines. Captain Richard Lamesson's Company C engaged them near Moncourt, lost 5 tanks, inflicted equal casualties, withdrew to allow Abrams to maneuver Company B for the killing blow. On September 21st, P-47 Thunderbolts from 19th Tactical Air Command joined the battle, rockets and bombs hammering German columns, destroying supply trucks, turning roads into death traps. But the Germans kept coming. On September 22nd, they launched their final major assault. This time, they targeted the village of Juvrecourt, a small town northeast of Arracourt, occupied by American forces, critical to CCA's defensive perimeter. The Germans committed everything: remaining Panthers from 111th Panzer Brigade, infantry from multiple divisions, artillery support. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams assembled Task Force Abrams, 37th Tank Battalion, 10th Armored Infantry Battalion, CCA's full artillery complement, direct air support from P-47s. At 0900 hours, he attacked. The assault on Juvrecourt became a combined arms masterpiece, tanks and infantry advancing in coordination, artillery suppressing German positions, aircraft striking assembly areas 3 kilometers behind enemy lines. But the critical action happened on a hill northeast of the town, Les Trois Croix, the Three Crosses, high ground overlooking the German approach routes. Abrams gave the mission to Company A, to William Spencer, the captain who'd lost his tank 3 days earlier, who'd walked 9 men through enemy territory, who refused evacuation and returned to command. Spencer had 7 operational Sherman tanks. At 0947 hours, German reconnaissance spotted 22 enemy tanks moving toward Juvrecourt. Spencer didn't wait for them to reach the town. He occupied Les Trois Croix and prepared to engage. At 10:15 hours, the German column, Panthers and Mark IVs in mixed formation, advanced into the kill zone. Spencer's 7 Shermans opened fire from elevated positions. The first German tank, a Panther, took a 76mm round through the turret side. Catastrophic kill. The second tank, another Panther, rear hit, engine compartment fire. Third, fourth, fifth. The German tried to maneuver, tried to flank, tried to mass fire on Spencer's position, but 7 American Shermans, occupying superior terrain, crewed by veterans who'd fought across France, proved unstoppable. At 11:47 hours, the engagement ended. 22 German tanks engaged, 17 destroyed, 5 escaped, damaged, retreating in disorder. Company A losses, 1 Sherman knocked out. Crew survived. When Abrams secured Juvrecourt later that afternoon, German resistance collapsed. The 111th Panzer Brigade, once a full-strength armored formation with over 100 vehicles, now had 7 operational tanks and 80 men. The counteroffensive was over. By September 29th, when the Battle of Arracourt finally ended, the math told a story that military historians would study for decades. German forces deployed 262 armored fighting vehicles, Panthers, Tigers, Mark IVs, assault guns. German forces operational after the battle, 62. American losses entire 4th Armored Division for the month of September, 41 M4 Sherman tanks, 7 M5 light tanks, 7 tank destroyers. Casualty ratio, approximately 3-to-1 in favor of the Americans, despite German superiority in armor, firepower, and initial numbers. The 37th Tank Battalion had faced 2 Panzer Brigades, had been outnumbered, had been outgunned, and they'd won. Not through superior equipment, not through overwhelming numbers, but through superior tactics, superior training, superior leadership. Men like Jimmie Leach, who charged when doctrine said defend, who counterattacked when survival meant retreat. Men like William Spencer, who walked through enemy lines to rejoin his company, who destroyed 17 tanks with 7 Shermans. Men like Creighton Abrams, who would later describe young Captain Leech with words that defined the entire battle. The placid, modest, friendly exterior of this officer disguises the fighting heart of a lion and the tenaciousness of a bulldog. That was the 37th Tank Battalion at Arracourt. Lions in Sherman tanks, bulldogs who refused to quit. Here's what the textbooks get wrong about tank warfare in World War II.
They tell you the Sherman was inferior, outmatched, a death trap. They tell you German tanks were superior in every way, thicker armor, bigger guns, better engineering. They tell you American tank crews won through numbers alone, 5 Shermans for every Panther, the myth goes. But Arracourt proved something different. The Sherman wasn't perfect. The 76mm gun couldn't reliably penetrate Panther frontal armor at combat ranges. The armor was thinner than German heavy tanks. On paper, one-on-one, the Panther was superior. But war isn't fought on paper. At Arracourt, American crews used terrain, used mobility, used radios, and combined arms coordination. used tactics that German doctrine hadn't anticipated. When Jimmie Leach charged 15 Shermans at 25 Panthers, he wasn't being suicidal, he was being smart. The Germans expected defense, he gave them aggression, and it broke their formation. When William Spencer destroyed 17 tanks with 7 Shermans, he wasn't lucky, he was competent. He used elevation, surprise, and crew training that allowed his gunners to fire faster and more accurately than German crews in superior vehicles. When Creighton Abrams coordinated tanks, infantry, artillery, and air support into a seamless combined arms assault, he demonstrated what American doctrine had been building toward since 1942. War isn't won by individual weapon systems, it's won by integrated systems working together. The Germans at Arracourt had better tanks. The Americans had better tank crews, better artillery coordination, better air support, better logistics, better doctrine. And when all those advantages combined, the result was 200 destroyed German armored vehicles versus 48 American losses. That's not 5 Shermans for every Panther. That's a 4-to-1 kill ratio in favor of the supposedly inferior force. After World War II, the U.S. Army studied Arracourt extensively. The battle became a textbook case in military academies. Tank officers studied Abrams' defensive tactics. Infantry commanders studied the coordination between armor and infantry. Air Force officers studied the integration of close air support. But the deepest lesson was psychological. Before Arracourt, American tank crews feared German armor. They'd been told repeatedly that Panthers and Tigers were invincible, that Shermans were inadequate, that survival required caution, numerical superiority, and luck. After Arracourt, that fear disappeared. American tankers learned they could win, not by having better tanks, but by being better tankers. They learned that aggression could defeat armor, that terrain mattered more than gun caliber, that training and coordination could overcome technical superiority. Jimmie Leach's 15 Shermans charging 25 Panthers, that became a legend, not because it was impossible, but because it worked. William Spencer's 7 tanks destroying 17 Panthers, that became doctrine, proof that elevation, surprise, and crew skill mattered more than specifications. Creighton Abrams' combined arms coordination, that became the template for American armored warfare for the next 70 years. The lessons of Arracourt echoed through Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, and every conflict where American armor fought. Because at Arracourt, outnumbered and outgunned tank crews proved something essential. Wars aren't won by the best equipment, they're won by the best soldiers. Jimmie Leach survived the war. He went on to command the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment in Vietnam, earned the Distinguished Service Cross at Bougainville during the Battle of the Bulge, December 24, 1944, when his company held against German armor trying to break through to Bastogne. 5 Purple Hearts, 3 Silver Stars, the Croix de Guerre, the Legion of Honor. But when historians asked him about his greatest moment, he always came back to September 19, 1944, the day he charged 15 Shermans at 25 Panthers and won. Creighton Abrams became a 4-star general, commanded all U.S. forces in Vietnam, served as Army Chief of Staff, had America's main battle tank, the M1 Abrams, named in his honor. But his reputation was built at Arracourt, built by the 37th Tank Battalion, built by men who refused to accept that German tanks were superior. William Spencer received the Distinguished Service Cross, survived the war, rarely spoke about September 22nd, the day he destroyed 17 tanks with 7 Shermans. When asked how he did it, he gave a 2-word answer: good crews. That was the truth of Arracourt. Not superhuman heroics, not impossible luck. Good crews, good training, good leadership.
Men who understood that wars aren't won by technology alone, but by the human beings who wield that technology. Today, if you drive through Lorraine, you can still find the ridgelines where Company B held the line. The villages, Arracourt, Juvrecourt, Leech, Chambray, look much the same as they did in 1944. Stone buildings, narrow roads, fields where tanks once maneuvered. There's a memorial at Chansonnet, a monument to the Battle of Arracourt and the men who fought there. In September 2009, Jimmie Leach returned to France for the 65th anniversary of the battle. He was 87 years old. He walked the ground where his Shermans had charged, stood on the ridgeline where he'd faced 25 Panthers with 15 tanks. A French reporter asked him what he remembered most. Leach thought for a long moment, then answered, "The sound of our engines, all 15 Shermans advancing together. That sound meant we weren't alone, meant we had each other. And as long as we had each other, we could face anything." That was the lesson of Arracourt. Not that American tanks were better, not that German crews were inferior, but that courage, training, and brotherhood could overcome any technical disadvantage. That 15 Shermans crewed by lions could hold off an armored brigade. That 7 tanks on a hilltop could destroy 17 Panthers. That wars aren't won by the machines we build, but by the men who refuse to quit. September 19th through 22nd, 1944, Arracourt, France. The tank battle that changed everything. Not because American armor was superior, but because American tankers were. And sometimes, that's the only advantage you need.